Hello everyone, it's Reese, and today I'm joined with Abigail and Katie. We are going to be discussing the controversial topic, resegregation of public schools. Before we get into any details behind this matter, I wanted to let you guys know our position statement. The resegregation of schools by neighborhood is not a good practice. This puts children of color and low-income students at disadvantage due to being forced to attend schools with less funding. And I'm sure everyone sitting in this room today would argue everyone deserves equal education. Well, all around the United States, the opportunities available for every student are unfortunately not the same. And the major issue behind this is school funding. But what does this really mean? Children become segregated since their neighborhood determines which school they attend. Then, this causes funding gaps. The funding gaps between schools. Schools that are located in neighborhoods that have higher property tax receive more funds. And then we have the schools located in neighborhoods with lower property tax that receive less funds. This tends to affect children of color who typically live in lower income neighborhoods. And when I'm talking about these funding gaps, I'm not talking about minimal amounts of money. I'm talking about a huge amount of money in a huge gap. So now I'm going to give you guys a preview of what we will be discussing today. The main issue is, why is this even a problem? Schools today are so racially segregated, you'd think Brown versus Board of Education never happened. But we'll get more in depth with that later when Abigail discusses the history behind this matter. Also, we are going to be discussing the lack of resources that the lower funding schools have. These lack of resources can result in poor test scores. There's more behind it, but we'll get into that. Also, these schools that have lower funding have a lack of technology. I wanted to add in that this is also affecting schools right here in Fort Wayne, whether you knew it or not. Throughout the presentation, I want everyone in the audience to really think about this topic. I want every single person to form their own opinion. Whether you end up on the same side as my group or the opposing side, we want to know your thoughts on the issue. Everyone sitting here today is a future teacher. So how does this really make you feel? Could you imagine being in a classroom where all the students didn't have laptops? But yet, our world today revolves around technology. These are skills our students need to be learning. Technology is a skill that'll help our students after high school if they're going to college or entering the workforce. Also, could you imagine your school not offering certain classes to give credits towards college or their future because your school simply doesn't have enough funding? Well, let's move on to Abigail, where she's going to start off with the history behind this matter.
In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was unconstitutional due to the Brown versus Board of Education case. Segregation then began to decline. The most substantial decline was seen between 1968 and 1972. In past research, we can see that progress against segregation has slowed by the 1990s, and some argue that it has actually begun to rebound. The overall progress from declines in segregation within school districts was partly counterbalanced by an increase in segregation between districts. In 2011, Let's compared changes in segregation in a national sample of 130 medium and large districts that had been under court order. As of 2006, 59 had attained unitary status, or they had basically eliminated segregation within their schools and no longer needed the court system to supervise the school's decisions. This still left 71 schools that had not achieved the unitary status. Though 59 did remain unitary, both types of districts admitted to having experienced an increase in segregation. Latino and Black students have become increasingly segregated into their own districts because of the low cost of property in the primarily urban and migrant areas. This effectively is creating a further economic and racial segregation in our education systems. These urban or migrant schools, usually considered to be low schools, meaning low-funded and underachieving schools, add to a host of many other equality problems. Some of these problems can be experienced and effective teachers who care about their students and their learning and know how to teach, usually choose not to teach in these low-paying districts. Also, according to eBuild, $23 billion more is being funded to predominantly white school districts compared to districts that serve mostly students of color. Schools located in urban and migrant areas will continue to be low because they are primarily funded on the value of property tax. As the problem of funding grows, so does the unequal distribution of resources in the schools. Lower funded schools lack many things that the higher funded schools tend to have. Some of these things are college readiness classes, to arts and technology. This leaves these children behind the higher funded schools.
How does this issue directly affect students within our public school system? While percentages specifically vary state by state, local income tax funds a large portion of the public school's budget within a neighborhood district. Student achievement, thus, is often related to the wealth of a school, which is demonstrated and detected by test scores. Poorer schools tend to have lower test scores, and vice versa do wealthier schools tend to have higher test scores. While, of course, this is not to say that children in wealthy schools don't ever struggle, or that children in poor schools can't succeed, rather that it is very important to note that the resources available to students, or the lack thereof, tend to be reflected by student achievement. Since children of color make up the majority of students in poorer schools, they are disproportionately affected by this issue. Looking at the city of Chicago as an example, white upper-class neighborhood public schools and black lower-class neighborhood public schools have a stark contrast in achievement, although they are within the same district. Oscar Mayer Elementary in wealthy Lincoln Park boasts of a Montessori education program complete with fine arts and even a bee farm. Westcott Elementary, however, in Chatham, on the south side of the city, with a 48% crime rate, however, boasts none of these extra programs. In addition, Westcott's test scores are concerningly low, with their students testing at only an 8% proficiency rate in English and only a 3% proficiency rate in math, shockingly below the state averages of 37 and 33%. Oscar Mayer, however, boasts a 73% and a 57% proficiency rate in these subjects. Obviously, any parent could see these numbers and want their child in the latter school, but if they are not lucky enough, or rather wealthy enough, to live in a wealthier neighborhood like Lincoln Park, they may have little to no other options. Both of these schools are public schools within the same district of CPS and are only about a 25-minute drive of each other, but clearly do not come anywhere close to offering students the same tools for success. This is through no fault of their own, but rather a result of the failed system. This also extends to the high school and college level, as students who grow up and go through public school in the wealthier suburbs are more likely to have a college degree than students who grow up in urban public schools across the country. Looking more locally, the same trend is present within Fort Wayne, as demonstrated by this map of Fort Wayne community schools. This map was retrieved from greatschools.org, which rates schools based upon factors such as student test scores, attendance, and student improvement rates. As you can see, the higher rated schools are grouped in the northern side of town, which tends to be inhabited by middle to upper class families who tend to be white. The lower rated schools are clustered across the central and southern sides of the city, which tend to be inhabited by middle to lower class families and families of color. Wealthier families can choose to send their children to private schools or simply purchase the home within a wealthier neighborhood to be grouping their child within the boundaries of a better public school. This privilege, of course, affects a vicious cycle. As more and more wealthy families leave a district as they find a school to be failing, so too do their income tax dollars leave, leaving those public schools with less and less funding, lowering their budget, and leaving the children left behind with fewer and fewer resources year by year.
Now, here comes the fun part. We want to see if you guys were listening and if you've learned anything from our presentation today. So we've threw in a couple questions and we want you guys to answer the best that you can. Our first question is, how much more money is being funded to predominantly white schools? Answer A is 43 billion. Answer B is 16 billion, and answer C is 23 billion. Let's take a couple seconds to think about your answer. And the correct answer is C, 23 billion. Our next question is, schools located in urban and migrant areas will continue to be low because they are funded on the value of their blank. Answer A is property tax. Answer B is student test scores. And answer C is how many donations are coming in from the community. Alright, we'll take a few more seconds to let you think about this one. And the correct answer is A, property tax. Our last question is, Westcott's test scores are concerningly low, with their students testing at a blank proficiency rate in English and a blank proficiency rate in math. Letter choice A is a 12% in English and a 3% in math. Letter B is an 8% in English and a 3% in math. And letter C is a 3% in English and an 8% in math. And we'll take a couple seconds to think about the answer to this last question. The correct answer is letter choice B, an 8% proficiency rate in English and a 3% proficiency rate in math.